6 o'clock, so I hope you got it.
Yep, nope, we're good. It's recording.
6 o'clock, and I'm calling our first, we have two meetings. This is the first meeting, Truth and Taxation meeting. All members are here. We have a new member, Nicole, is it? Nicole Pelkey? Freshman, who is going to be one of our student representatives to the school board. So we welcome her tonight. If you'll have a chance to, maybe not, I guess you're not going to say anything tonight. You said.
We'll just do a little bit more of an introduction.
When we get to
in
the
next
regular meeting.
Yep.
Okay, so approval of the agenda for this first meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Gerald was first and Gerald seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Truth and Taxation hearing, information.
All right. So we will invite up Steve Pumper from PMA to walk through the truth and taxation information prior to our certification of the levy. So we pull up our, let's test this and let's do. Let you drive it however you like.
Thanks. Do you mind if I stand up closer to the screen?
I don't
You
mind
okay?
at all.
All right,
Nope.
thanks.
You
Appreciate
just take
that.
care of it.
Well, good evening, everyone. Steve Pumper with PMA Financial. Been a pleasure to do this for several years for your district. Mr. Board Chair and Board Member, Superintendent. We're going to go through this presentation. It is something
Be able to, it should roll.
I'm trying to roll.
Honestly, you might have to put it on the table.
Oh, really?
Maybe.
That works?
Yep.
Okay. All right, we're gonna try to do this. Okay, we'll figure it out. All right. Our agenda tonight is reviewing the requirements of the meeting. Just to let you know, there's probably the majority of districts in the state of Minnesota are having their meeting either last night or tonight. Every district needs to have a meeting, and you need to talk about the current school year budget, which we'll do. We'll talk about the tax levy before you take action on certifying the levy. And then one of the last requirement is you have to allow for public comment before you actually take action on certifying the levy, if there's any public who wants to comment. The meetings must be held between November 25th and December 30th, and the meetings cannot start before 6 o'clock. So that's why you're starting tonight at 6 o'clock. The reason you have November 25th as the first date that you can start is counties are required to mail out their proposed tax notices anytime after the 24th. So you obviously want your residents to have the notice before you have your hearing, and then you have to certify before the end of the year. So that's why December 30th is the last day you can have it. It can be part of a regularly scheduled meeting. You chose to have a meeting prior to your regular meeting. And then, as I mentioned, you have to discuss the budget and the tax levy and allow for public comments. So the first thing we're going to do, the first requirement is talking about your fiscal year 25 budget. So that's the year that you're in right now, school year 24-25. Your district has 6 different funds that you report to the state on, and those are set by the state. The 3 highlighted funds there are bolded funds: general fund, community service fund, and the debt service fund. All have a tax levy component to it as well. So we'll actually go in a little more in depth on those 3 funds as we talk about the levy. As board members probably know, you're required to pass or set up a budget by June 30th of each year. So your district did that, took that action, and here's a summary of your 2025 fiscal year budget. You can see your 6 different funds, and you can see the total revenues and total expenses that you took action on in each of your funds. Pretty much balanced budgets for a little bit. Your general fund has a slight, I'm sure intentional imbalance as far as the expenditures exceeding general fund, which means that you're spending some of your reserves as you go forward with this year. Sorry, I'm just trying to get us to cooperate. Municipal schools are funded by different revenue sources. You receive revenue from the federal government, you receive money from state aid, you receive money from the local taxes that we're talking about right now, and you also receive some what we call local revenue, which would actually be perfect for tonight, for like your gate receipts you have for your basketball games. That's a very usually small portion of your funding, although you maybe get some granting as well. The largest funding source, as you can see on this chart, is from state aid. So So your district, when we talk about your entire budget, all those 6 funds, 65% of all your revenue comes directly from the state. Federal aid is only 4% for your district. Your other miscellaneous revenue is 10%. And the part that we're talking about tonight, when we talk about the levy, represents 21% of your total budget. So again, just so you know, the majority of your funding is coming directly from the state. When we look at where does that revenue go by fund, there's no surprise here that 82% of your revenue goes to the general fund, and that's a term that we use for what most people consider K-12 education expenses. That includes all your teaching staff, your administration, your transportation, your utilities, your expenses for the building, et cetera, your paras. So pretty much, your books and curriculum, everything what you talked about there. So the majority of your funding is going to your general fund. And we look at the expenditures then within your general fund. These are, again, our programs as defined by the state. This large slice of the pie is categorized as elementary and secondary instruction, which represents 39% of your budget. However, because of the way the state requires you to report your expenditures, if I add up all the pieces of the pie that go directly into your classroom, for your district, that represents 61%. So 61% of every dollar that comes in goes directly into the classroom. We're just taking a sidestep here, looking at a financial highlight for your district. Back in March 3rd of 2022, Moody's is a rating agency, a third-party, unbiased rating agency that looks at your finances, and they do this for many districts throughout the state, especially when you're going to sell bonds. And when they did that the last time for you, you actually had an upgrade. You went from an A1 rating to a AA3 rating. The highest rating is a AAA. And so you would go from a AA3 to a AA2 to a AA1 to a AAA. So you're 3 notches below the highest rating, which only 3 districts in the state have the highest rating. So, I mean, you have a very solid rating for a school district your side for sure.
What is the state average about?
State average is probably a AA2. Yep. But they vary all the way to a BBB.
I understand, yeah.
Yep, so it really depends. And a lot of that, I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I mean, I will as much as you want, but
No,
it's, okay, great, then I won't. We'll keep going on. Okay, so now we're going to switch. We're going to talk about the tax levy. So here's kind of the timeline as you set the tax levy. So in the summer, your staff is sending information to the Department of Education so they can start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. In September, this board would have met and certified what we call a preliminary levy. And at that point in time, you are not able to certify a final levy for a dollar amount higher than what you certified as your preliminary. You can go lower, with the exception of districts who held a referendum on November 5th. If you held, your district didn't this year, but if you hold an election on November 5th, then you're able to go higher if your voters obviously voted yes for you. So between November 25th and December 30th, districts are having your truth and taxation meetings, which you're having tonight. And then you'll certify your taxes at tonight's meeting. And then in 2025, the actual property taxes are collected by all the property owners, or from the property owners that go to the county, which eventually works its way back to the school district. So the state limits the amount of property tax levy that you're able to collect. The school board does not have infinitive authority to levy whatever you want to. It's all established by a number of formulas. A lot of those are established by how many students you have. So that's a major driver of your funding. Some of it's driven by specific expenditures. For instance, if you're levying for unemployment expense, you only can levy for what you actually are paying out, as an example. A very, very small part of community ed is levied based on the total population of your district, so not student count, but population. And then if you go to the voters and have specific authorization, you can get some additional dollars. And then some levies are based on what your property valuations are for the district. So for your district, when we look at the 3 different funds, the large one is a general fund on top, community services second, and debt services third there. In total, you are planning on levying $3,531,666. which is just over $33,000 more than you levied last year, which represents just under a 1% increase of total funds, a 0.96% increase. And we'll take a look at what some of those drivers are that changed from last year to this year. There's kind of three major changes for you. The first one is called your capital project referendum, and board members who were here several years ago, you remember when you went to your voters to authorize that. And you authorize a specific tax rate. You're collecting a certain percentage based on the total property wealth of your district. So as the property wealth of your district goes up, since you're levying a percentage of that, your capital projects referendum revenue goes up as well. So for your district, that went up just over $52,000. So that actually is additional dollars for your school district budget based on the property wealth of your district that you're levying. The LTFM, and I'm going to take a little closer look at this on the next slide, that's actually going up roughly $41,000, but this doesn't represent additional money for your district. It just represents a shift from who's paying that money. The state's going to pay you less this year in state aid, and your local taxpayers are going to pay you more, and I'll show you why on the next slide. And then the last major adjustment, in this case, it's a decrease in your levy, is just over $51,000. And that's because, you know, the slide I showed you before is when your administration is providing estimates to the state in the summer, you're estimating how many students you have, you're estimating expenditures, and there's a 3-year look back on all that information to true up on actuals. And so every year the state, says, okay, you either collected too much revenue over the past 3 years, or you collected too little revenue over the past 3 years. And so it makes adjustments like that. And that's very typical for every district. I mean, because you're always estimating, you never know exactly what's going to happen. So as I mentioned, the change in the tax levy does not necessarily mean that you're going to get more budgeted revenue. And I'm going to show you that here in, as I mentioned, your LTFM revenue. So in the left-hand column, that's last year, your taxes that you collected and paid 2024. Your total, LTFM stands for long-term facility maintenance revenue, was just over $374,000, okay? Last year, you levied $266,000 of that amount, and the state contributed $107,000. This year, and this is driven by, again, student population, a little bit of the age of your buildings as well. But you're going to get, or for next school year, I should say, so taxes payable in 2025, you're going to receive $368,000. So you're going to get about $6,000 less of revenue than you did last year. However, your total taxes, your local taxes are going up by $4,000 to $280,000, and your aid's going down to $88,000. Now, why is that happening? So again, I just want to make sure you understand. You're getting less revenue, but your local taxpayers are paying more. So why is that true? It's because what we call the state equalization formulas. And the way the state, their fairness, and this is not a criticism, I'm just saying this is how their calculations are. They're saying we take all the property value in your district, we divide it by the number of students you have, and that's kind of the basis for how wealthy they think your district is. So if your valuations of how your property is going up, which is true in your district, true in most districts actually, and your student population is going down, that means that you have more money per child based on what the state thinks you have. And so they think that you have the ability to pay more and the state gets to pay less. And so that's what's happening, to your district that way. Okay, so this is a trend over time of what the property valuation is, and this is of course by the county. The county is the one who values your property by the assessors. And you can see, as we look back in 2017 all the way through 2021, you're around a 5% increase every year, which is pretty normal for evaluations. But then you had this big increase of 19%. And actually, that's a little bit lower than what state average was in 2023. It was more like 23% for most districts throughout the state. You had about 11% increase in last year, 2024, and now you're coming back to the kind of the norm, which is again, this is kind of trending everywhere, not just your district, to that 5% increase in valuations. But when you look at your own property tax statements, you probably saw a major increase in your value 2 years ago. So this probably is not a surprise to you, but that's kind of what happened statewide as well. So the timeline for the taxpayers, we looked at, what happens for the district as they're collecting their taxes. Here's what happens for the taxpayers part. In March 2024, you would have all received a preliminary valuation notice from your county saying, here's what your property is. We're valuing your property at this much. You would have had spring and early summer, a time to go to the county if you wanted to protest or challenge that tax amount. And then the county can make a decision, whether or not to change the valuation of your piece of property as well. Again, November, the counties deliver the proposed tax notices. We're in the time period now where the school district's holding your truth and taxation meetings, but so is the county, and so are the cities. They're holding these same meetings as well. You're at this point now in March where the taxpayers will receive their statements and you'll have to pay it. The only resource you have right now as an individual tax holder is to go to tax court if you want to appeal your taxes. This is a notice. This is what a notice looks like. This is a generic notice, but this is something that you would look like for your C. One thing I will point out, remember that when you get your tax statement, it's also showing your taxes for your city and your county, not just the school district. So what I'm illustrating here tonight are just the taxes for your school district. And then on the back side of those taxes, it shows you what you can do to appeal your taxes. Just a reference point for anybody who's listening. And then again, there's three variables on how much tax you're going to pay. One is based on the market value of your property, which again, you don't have control over. The assessor is required to actually be within a 95 to 102% value of your property. That's what you need to get to. And then it depends what classification you have, whether you're a residential piece of property or ag land, or if you're a commercial industrial piece of property. And then the tax levy total dollar amount that's established by the jurisdictions determines how much tax you're going to pay. So for the school districts, there are two types of tax valuations, and this is important to understand as far as who pays what. Some of your tax that you're collecting is based on net tax capacity, which really means that everybody pays that. Every type of property, unless you're an exempt piece of property like a church, is going to pay that their share of that portion of the tax. However, the tax that's valued on the referendum market value, which would be mostly your operating referendum, that excludes ag land and seasonal rec from paying taxes. So that's important when we look at who pays what. And so for your district, for the taxes payable in 2025, 2/3 of your money, the $2.3 million, is spread over everybody. So everybody pays that. And then the last third, the 1.2, is paid by really your residential homeowners and your commercial industrial. And we're excluding ag land and seasonal rec. One thing I want to tell you about ag land, though, to make sure you understand that, a person who owes ag land, their house, garage, and 1 acre, they pay on the referendum market value as well, just like a house. But the rest of their land, they're not paying that tax on. Okay, so when you look at dividing the property tax pie, so if I go back that slide, you're going to collect just over $3.5 million. So who gets to pay all that? Well, the simple part of it is based on the wealth of your piece of property. People who have a higher wealth of property are going to pay more share of that $3 million than people who have a lower sense. Okay, so that's a really easy part of it. But it really matters what's happening with valuation changes. And people say, hey, my house went up 20%. Does that mean I'm going to pay more money? Well, it depends. Depends on what happens with our other houses in your district. Did they go up 20% or more? The easy way I look at this, and I want to spend a ton of time on here, is just making it as simple as possible. If you were collecting $100 total for the district, and you had two pieces of property that only two houses in the whole district, and they each were valued at $100,000, you each going to pay $50. Next year, however, if their value of the properties go up to $120,000, but they both go up to $120,000, they're still only going to pay $50 if you're collecting $100, right? So it doesn't really matter what the valuation is. It matters what your valuation is in comparison to everybody else. And so here's the exact same example. You're collecting $100 or you're paying $50, but in the next year, one house only goes up 10%. While the other house goes up 40%. So then that's where their tax burden shifts, okay? On who pays it. So you just have to kind of just see what's happening, and we'll show you that as we get here. This last one I'm showing also, I won't spend a lot of time on here too, but If residential is growing at a different rate than commercial, industrial, and ag land, all that shifts on who's paying what and what portion as well. Two major changes to property tax law that took place last year to this year. And that the first one applies to most people who have a house, within your district. That's what's called a market value exclusion, a homestead market value exclusion. Last year, if you had a home that was valued at $402,000 or less, you received some kind of credit, and it was a graduated credit. So the closer you got to $400,000, the lesser credit you received. This year, that cap was raised to $517,000. So now if you have a home that's valued at $517,000 or less, you're going to get some kind of credit. Automatically, you don't apply for this credit, it just comes automatically to you. So that helps people all the way up to a $517,000 home. The same thing is true, a bigger impact for ag land. They capped out at the homestead credit at $2,150,000 last year for the land amount that you own. That was raised to $3,500,000. So now if you have ag property, you're going to get additional credit even if you're all the way up to $3.5 million. And for ag land, there's a lot of people who certainly hit those caps. So that's a big piece of change that will help property owners in your district. All right, so now we're going specifically what's going to happen to 2025 taxes for your district. This chart right here is showing a home that's valued at the top, it says $280,000, kind of an average amount in your district. The school district taxes on this home are $861, that top number there. If we look from top to bottom, what makes up that $861? Well, $156 of the total $861 is based on the voters approving your operating levy. The $276 is based on what's called local optional equity and transition, and that's just a function of your levy. $290 is being paid by the voter-approved capital projects referendum and other additional bonds that you approved. Very small portion, $28 is board-approved debt. And then 112, the balance is everything else on the 40-page document that comes to make up your entire levy. So for your district, if you look at 156 and 290, we're talking $446. So over half of the total tax levy was voter approved. You went to the voters and they said that, yes, we support this. We're voting yes on that. And that makes up over half of the amount of taxes that you're collecting for the school district. When we look at the impacts, what I'm showing you here, well, this is pretty hard for you to see in this one. You'll be able to see it better on the next two charts here. But this is showing you different types of classification. It starts with residential on top, then it goes to commercial, and goes to ag land, et cetera. And this is showing you a house that has a 5% increase, which is pretty typical of what's happening to most of your properties in your district. So I'm just going to read the top line because it's easy to see. If you have a house last year that was $123,800, that's the value. This year, with a 5% increase, it'd be valued at $130,000. And if that was your experience, you would have a $16 reduction in your school district taxes for next year as you're collecting it. And it looks like for residential, until you get up to the $500,000 house, you have a reduction all the way up to there. A $500,000 house has a $2 increase. I mean, so pretty negligible. If we look at what would happen if my house had no value increase. So if I had a $123,000 house last year, almost $124,000, and it still say that same value, you would have a $37 decrease this year at your school district portion of your taxes. What happens if I'm in a house though and my value went up by 10%? So higher than the average of 5%. Well, in that case, that $123,800 house is now worth $136,180, and I'd have a $4 increase in my school district portion of taxes. So what this illustrates two things in my mind is that there's going to be very negligible increases for people own property within your district because your total tax levy is going up less than 1%. But everyone's going to have their own experience. I mean, it's rare that everybody's going to have exactly a 5% increase in their house or exactly a 10% or a 0. So it just depends where you're at. But I think it's going to be pretty negligible for any homeowner here. What this shows you is the tax trend over the last 8 years. It's showing you a house that's worth $280,000 now, but 8 years ago, that house would have been worth $180,000. Okay, so it's gone up roughly $100,000 in value over an 8-year period of time. And you can see what has happened with the school district's taxes accordingly. You can see this bigger jump right here from 2022 to 2023, and that's when you passed your capital project referendum, which again, you went to your voters for. So that makes sense why it went up in that year. The Act to School credit, quick summary on that too, again, is any of your debt payments that you're paying for your building bonds or improvements to your buildings. The state's paying 70% of that bill for any ag land owner. So for your district, that represents approximately 18%. So 18% of all your debt is being paid by the state because of the makeup of your district and how much ag land you have. In dollar amounts, that's saying of the $1,284,000 that you're paying in debt payments next year, the state's paying $232,000 of that. So that's a pretty nice payback for you and your property owners for your district for the Act to School credit. Here's the same charts with showing what's happening with ag land, how much per acre they're paying on a $5,000, if we're valuing it at $5,000. And then this last piece of slide here, if you put this online or as you're taping this is just a reference page for property owners in your district that there are different tax refund programs that they can apply for. They do that through the Department of Revenue at the state. So all this brings us to a conclusion that the recommended levy certification amount, and you need to do it to a specific dollar amount tonight, would be to certify a levy at $3,531,666.28. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you to open the meeting to any public comments.
Okay. Look at, anybody on the board have any comments? You did an excellent job.
Not very much.
As usual.
I have the,
And in time too. How about that?
I have the,
Did you say please?
I think, did I?
Yeah.
Please?
Okay, so we are up to looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the pay 2025 levy of $3,531,666.28. Second.
Gerald, any comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Gerald makes a motion.
Second.
I'll let Rachel second this one.
Yep.
Okay. We adjourned at, well, I don't know if that time, 6:28.